everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to give the people online a minute to enter from the waiting room. And if you're joining online, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat. If you have any issues hearing any of the speakers today, please let us know in the chat and we will resolve that for you. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I just wanted to share that the views and opinions expressed by speakers today are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of SID-United States or their respective employers. We do not endorse any specific perspectives, strategies, or advice shared during today's session. So the title of today's event is Building the Digital Foundations of Tomorrow, What's Next for Digital Public Infrastructure. This is a hybrid event, so we have people here in the room in Washington, D.C., and we have some people joining online as well. Some things to note, today's session will be recorded and shared publicly. If you're joining virtually, you can access closed captioning through your individual Zoom settings. And please post your questions for the speakers if you're virtual in the chat. If you're in person, you'll have a chance to share your question out loud. But if you're virtual, please post them in the chat. And please do note if it's for a specific speaker. Unfortunately, due to limited time, we may not get to every question. I just wanted to quickly show you some of our upcoming events after today. So on September 10, we have an event on international development banks, which I think would be of interest to this group, followed by Scaling Resilience in Ethiopia on September 16th, and then a Ukraine Affinity Group meeting on September 18th, and then the event on mapping and activating your professional network on October 8th. We are always announcing additional events, so please do subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already, and check out our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the moderator for today, Toshiro Baum. So Toshiro, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon to all of you joining us both in person and virtually from around the world. My name is Toshiro Baum, and I am the co-chair of the Digital Development Work Group here at SID-US. I think we all know it's been an eventful year in the international development space, so I'm glad that we could join together for this event. And I'm really pleased to see the turnout both virtually and in the room today. As the Digital Development Work Group's co-chair, it's my pleasure to moderate today's event, which we've titled Building the Digital Foundations of Tomorrow. But before we dive in, I just want to thank a few people who helped make today's event happen. First, a big thank you to Dan and the team at SID-US for hosting. I believe that this is one of the first work group events that's been held this year, so that makes this all the more special. Second, I'd also like to thank Dr. Uzma Barton, a panelist today, and also the co-chair of the Development Finance Work Group here at SID-US. Uzma had the great idea to co-host this event with the Digital Development Work Group, and it's what I hope will be the first of many collaborations together. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity today to moderate a discussion on a topic that is increasingly important to both international development and geopolitics, digital public infrastructure for low and middle income countries. In our rapidly evolving world, digital technology has become a critical enabler of socioeconomic development. It's not just about connecting people anymore. It's also about providing access to essential services, fostering innovation, and creating equitable opportunities for all. However, the stark reality is that a significant portion of the global population, predominantly in low and middle income countries, developing countries, remains digitally disconnected and struggles to access the potential of digital technology. Digital public infrastructure, DPI, is key to unlocking this potential, especially for developing countries, economies, and societies. DPI refers to the foundational digital systems and services provided by governments and public entities. This includes broadband networks, digital identification systems, e-health platforms, digital financial systems, online education portals, and more. This infrastructure serves as a backbone for a nation's digital economy, empowering citizens with access to information, services, and opportunities that were previously unimaginable. For developing countries, investing in DPI is not merely a development or a policy goal, it's becoming an economic necessity. DPI can dramatically improve service delivery and economic development across developing countries. We've seen that in e-government services such as online tax filing or health records. It can significantly reduce bureaucracy, corruption, and transaction costs. For instance, in Kenya, the M-Pesa mobile money transfer system has transformed financial inclusion, and provide services to millions who were previously unbanked. DPI also plays a pivotal role in education and healthcare. We've seen digital learning platforms and telemedicine overcome geographical barriers and provide quality education to students and quality healthcare to patients in remote areas. The COVID-19 pandemic showed how digital help systems can also help save lives through more efficient contact tracing and vaccine distribution. DPI is also crucial to innovation and entrepreneurship in the growing digital economy. By providing accessible and affordable digital tools, they encourage local tech startups and SMEs and contribute to job growth and economic growth. Last, DPI can enhance transparency and civic participation. Open data portals, e-voting systems can increase government accountability and citizen engagement in democratic processes. But we all know that building this infrastructure requires concerted efforts. It doesn't come cheap. It needs to come from both public and private sectors. It necessitates substantial investment, policy support, and capacity building. International cooperation is often vital to effective DPI, helping to ensure that the infrastructure is not only built, but it's also interoperable and meets standards for data privacy, cybersecurity, and more. This event is centered around the upcoming UN General Assembly, UNGA, and we're likely to hear about how DPI is critical to achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, as we have in years past. But we're also likely to hear some different messages this year. It's no secret that the global landscape for funding and deploying DPI has changed drastically from last year. I'm pleased to be joined by a panel of experts today who will offer a variety of perspectives on this and help us better understand the current dynamics and what we can expect to see as UNGA kicks off. First is Dr. Uzma Barton. Uzma has over 20 years of experience in international development and public finance. She's advised governments, development, and donors on fiscal reform, public financial management, and digital governance. She began her career in Pakistan Civil Service at the Federal Board of Revenue before moving into senior advisory roles across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific with USAID, MCC, and the World Bank. Uzma is currently consulting with the Asian Development Bank and co-chairs the SID-US Development Finance Work Group. I'm pleased, and I think she'll bring a variety of different perspectives on designing and implementing DPI to our discussion today. We also have Beverly Hatcher-Mu. Beverly is the Director of Policy at Development Gateway, an IRIX venture. She's an international lawyer with experience in digitization and has previously worked for the World Bank Group. Beverly is on the board of Accountability Lab and is a founding member of the Translational Committee of the Data for Policy Journal, an imprint of Cambridge University Press. Next, we have Tulsi Parida. Tulsi is the Global Director of Multilateral and Development Finance Partnerships at Visa. Her work is at the intersection of digital transformation in the public sector, where she builds partnerships with multilaterals and development finance institutions looking to use digital solutions to improve financial inclusion. She brings a decade of experience at the intersection of tech, society, and business, with a commitment to reducing digital inequality and promoting responsible and inclusive technology. Prior to Visa, Tulsi led teams at various startups working to bridge digital divides in literacy, education, both in the US and in India. Last but not least, we have Eric Ramirez. Eric is a senior program officer with the Gates Foundation's Development Policy and Finance team, where he works to support countries to improve their domestic resource mobilization using digital public infrastructure. His past experience includes strengthening health information systems across Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and serving as the director of e-government for El Salvador, where he led the implementation of foundational DPI, including national digital identification and data exchanges. I'll turn it over to our panel. Uzma, I'll start with you. Give us some thoughts on DPI and what we can expect here.
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the discussion today on the future of digital public infrastructure, and thanks for explaining a lot of things which I was going to skip. So I got a good, context already built up in here. Also, as a co-chair for the Development Finance Work Group, I thank Sid, Dan, and everyone else who made this discussion possible. I know I have a short time, so I'll directly get into the subject. When I was thinking about, how we are looking at foundations of digital public infrastructure from future perspective, I it took me to look back. I went back to my own life journey about 30 years ago and started looking at, how my life touched digital public infrastructure and how it evolved throughout my life. So I'm going to share 3 snapshots of my own life journey as it touched DPI. Back in 1991, in the high school, I was growing up in a rural Pakistan, and the high school was 15 miles away only, but lack of road and safe infrastructure, including the buses and feasibility to go to the school, made it impossible to get to the school. That really touched me in terms of how infrastructure is not just something which connects you, but it provides you an opportunity. And we see how many billions of kids probably facing even today this difficulty. For me at that time was that we need to have a safe and reliable infrastructure to enable girls like me to be able to go to school. And that same touches with the digital side when we are talking about digital public infrastructure, that it should be grounded in an ecosystem of safety and safeguards. I'm fast forwarding to the next snapshot, which is 2005, working with the government of Pakistan, the Federal Board of Revenue. I was leading the implementation of a World Bank tax reform project, which aimed at digitization of the tax records, very early steps towards making a movement on the DPI side. We were digitizing the records, but people who have worked in the civil service may know that the records are golden eggs for the staff who are keeping and protecting the records. So we did reform. However, we saw that as we were digitizing, there were more and more, sabotage efforts going on by the staff. Computers were crashing, as well as, files vanishing or records vanishing. I think at that time, probably we were caught up in the problem that what was happening. But now when I look back 15 years ago, I feel that this was not grounded in overall governance reforms. We did not take into account that there will be staff redundancies. There are vested interests that needs to be taken into account before we implement digitization. We are not even talking about digitalization or automation. So, and I've seen over the course of my life that we often go for more fancy add-ons instead of grounding them within the ecosystem. I'm moving fast forward to now today, 2025. I'm looking at Rwanda, implementing the DPI framework, which is called Rembo or Gateway, which is providing 100+ services online, reducing probably millions of hours spent by citizens to go and apply for those services. What Rwanda did differently than what did not happen in Pakistan's case was that they did 3 things. One, they provided kiosks for those people who did not have digital access. USDD enabled services. They started very early on stakeholder engagement to take care of the rent seekers and people whose interest will be lost after digitalization of the service delivery. And the third thing, what they did was they did include reskilling programs for the staff who would be redundant. So building a trust with the citizens. To me, now when I think about, 30 or 3 decades of my life, I feel this is something which is a good progress, but at the same time, probably 30 years ago or 20 years ago, these things should have been a consideration as well. So the other day, I looked at an interesting title that whether AI or DPI would be the future for an aid. Irrespective of that, I think MDBs, multilateral development banks, as well as forums like the UN or UNGAB, which is starting next week, they need to focus on also situating the DPI or digitalization efforts into the governance frameworks. You mentioned about the cost. It does involve cost, and it delays the processes, but at the same time, it provides the sustainable foundation, which will be there to add on other services. So for me at this point is that as we are moving, we're going to look at UNGA or a month after, World Bank's, IMF's annual meetings, how these institutions are going to dedicate not only resources, but also focus on developing the ecosystem around DPIs. So the digital divide that you mentioned, and I think we might be talking more about it later, but to address a digital divide, which is really real and deep in most of the countries that we work in. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Uzma. And yeah, I think it comes as no surprise to a lot of people who work in international development, but certainly the change management or understanding the system or political economy of a change is always essential to making that work. And so thank you. Those are some wonderful insights. Beverly, I'll turn to you now. You're joining us online from Senegal, I believe. And you are at a conference right now, if I understand correctly, where you are speaking to quite a few civil society actors about this very subject and about DPI. Tell us what you're hearing, what you're observing, and as well, what your thoughts are for UNGA and the what to expect around DPI.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to keep it short. Can everybody hear me okay? I mean, I hope for the best.
Yes,
Super.
yeah.
Okay. If I sweat, I'm super excited to see you, but it is honestly so hot here. And in order to find a quiet space, I am really excited for this conversation, such that I am willing to sweat a little extra to have the conversation. So thank you so much for that. So I work for Development Gateway. I won't go into too much detail, but just for a little bit of context, we've worked on digital development for the last 25 years. We're a hybrid of officers or program managers and software engineers in-house. So we've worked on what I would frame as the first and second generation of a lot of digital systems. So that's sort of the lens I'm bringing to talking about DPI and where we see some of the trends. So in Dakar, I'm here at the Africa Food Systems Forum, and I would say there are two key themes that are coming out broadly that I think are very broadly applicable. And then one theme I think is missing from the conversation, but I would love to hear more of. One is that, and this should be no surprise, there's very close link between DPI and AI and other emerging technologies. Investment in DPI is really ultimately about value addition, right? And part of connecting digital ID payments and centering inclusion both adds value and becomes part of the infrastructure AI is going to need today and tomorrow in order to scale. So there's been a big emphasis on, in these rooms around agriculture, but for African transformation more broadly, what does it need to look like in order for African countries to be ready for AI? And DPI and a lot of the infrastructure that's being built around that is a critical piece of the discussion. I think the second theme is around how we really need a stronger push for sector-specific DPI. Obviously, I'm biased, we're biased. It's a room full of agriculture nerds. There's a very strong interest in seeing agriculture-specific DPI and seeing that grow. And I'm in favor of that sort of general trend because I think part of building trust, I know we have new technology, that adaptation and implementation of technology is very old. You still need humans to buy in and to trust it. And part of building trust is showing results. And one of the quickest ways we can do that is by identifying, elevating, and scaling real use cases that matter to people in their day-to-day lives. Agriculture is a great place to pull from, not the only sector, of course, but things like farmer advisory services, procurement of things, seeds and fertilizer. What could we do with Farmer ID plus digitized payments to facilitate making the procurement of those critical agriculture inputs easier going forward to really boost productivity? So again, a very agriculture specific example, but we've got tons we can pull from health, and really a strong interest in seeing how can we make sure it doesn't just stay at the top layer, but really reaches key government services that many citizens are using on a regular basis. So lastly, the thing that I'm not hearing that I wish I was hearing more of in this room and in some other rooms around DPI, you'll often hear DPI framed as multiple buildings. ID is one building block, payments is another, payment and financing is another building block. and data exchange and interoperability. And it's that last block that I feel we're not talking enough about. So that's really about data exchange and interoperability. DPI developing in a vacuum. I think billions of dollars have been spent globally, not just in Africa. It's really a global conversation. First and second generation digital systems that I mentioned a bit earlier. Many of these are currently serving critical government service functions, and they are newly or more deeply at risk due to the shutdown and restructuring of USAID funding. So from my perspective, there's both a sector-specific, but really a global national strategy conversation about sustainability of digital technology that needs to be had. The bottom line is legacy systems are many. There are many of them. And new technology and new infrastructure is extremely expensive. How can we optimize what we have with data standards, with better data governance? I saw there was a question in the chat about how we work with sensitive data and DPI. A lot of that is a governance question, not just the laws, but the processes and procedures like the data management plans in place that protect those so that they can be used effectively but safely. There's a bigger question here also about how can we plan more strategically at national, regional, and global level to encourage national roadmaps, really prioritize technology and digital sustainability, talking of enhancing the wheel rather than reinventing it to make it a bit more colloquial. Money is tight. There isn't a ton of appetite to sink. There are so many competing priorities, climate being one of them, that require massive amounts of funding. And ownership is crucial if we're going to talk about sustainability and use long term. So how can we really think about DPI, and especially that last building block, in the context of what we have, connecting and thinking about our existing legacy systems and how they can be repurposed for that future vision that I think many countries, not just African ones, have. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Beverly. Yeah, a lot to think about there and some wonderful points. Tulsi, I want to turn to you now and get a perspective. Beverly shared some thoughts coming out of the agricultural sector. You obviously are working in the financial payments sector. What are you seeing there? Does any of that kind of ring true to you?
Yeah, thanks, Toshiro, and thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm in London, so good evening to those on my time zone or similar time zones, and good morning, afternoon to others. Yeah, so as Toshiro mentioned, I work at Visa, and I am part of our government solutions team. My role specifically is working with multilateral and development finance partners to use digital solutions to improve financial inclusion. But our team more broadly is looking at how we can work with governments and specifically looking at digital payments and seeing how can we streamline digital payment solutions, which is one component of DPI, to really make governments more efficient, with the end result being that the citizens, businesses, constituents of that government are getting the outcomes and the benefits that they need, and that investment is actually resulting in real impact. And we're not just talking about looking at numbers of 90% digitized, things like that. That's great as a great statistic, but what does that actually mean for people and for businesses? And that's what we're working on. The DPI question is interesting. I think DPI as a term is one that I want to interrogate as well, right? So I think as we look at digital public infrastructure today, it's the phrase and the acronym DPI has probably exploded over the last 5 years of international development in the government sector. And I think the version of what we now term DPI has actually been around for decades. So if you look at e-government strategies or ICT transformation journeys, a lot of those conversations actually started in the early 2000s or before that. The DPI of today is largely a conversation that's centered around one particular model that's looking at kind of government-owned and government-run structures, digital foundational structures. What I think we will see in the future is actually, and what we're starting to see now, is many more models evolving. So what started as, colloquially the India stack, is one approach, but we are now seeing a lot of more mixed models. We're seeing countries that are embracing a public-private collaboration because of the fact that there's an understanding both from the visa side, but also from where the folks that we're speaking to, that no one entity has the expertise to do everything. And to Beverly's point about there even being the need for sectoral specific expertise, I think that that's hugely important. So how can we get the right players in the room, both public, and private sector, to really create inclusive systems? And we've seen, that there's a couple of examples that are focusing on the government run, government owned, but the mixed ones I think have seen true success in terms of not just inclusion, but also making sure that those systems, to the question that came in the chat around data privacy and cybersecurity, right? So I think one of the examples that I think of a country that's done it really well is Kazakhstan. Which may seem like a random example, but I think what Kazakhstan's done really well is they have integrated. They have two different types of digital identity that goes for both government services and financial services. They have encouraged the banks in the country to actually participate in the creation. They've made sure that there isn't one monopoly that's taking over, state-owned or private-owned. They've created this kind of API sandbox actually for there to be more innovation in the country of how do we create these systems and for which use cases. And the result is, not just because of that, but because they've also paired that with digital inclusion strategies and financial literacy campaigns. They've made sure that the people who are going to be using these systems are actually well equipped. They have the infrastructure to do it, and they also have the understanding to make the most out of these government services, financial services, health services, and beyond. So that's just one example, but I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into what this new future of DPI can look like, where there's a role for many different types of institutions to play.
Thank you, Tulsi. Yeah, fantastic points there. And let's put it this way: there's a lot of talk these days, especially in the city we're in, about an American tech stack, and I think there's a tension here that you're touching on about first defining what a national tech stack, if we're going to do it nationally, looks like. And then for a lot of countries out there, right, whether that makes sense if you are also looking for interoperability or as Beverly mentioned, greater even just regional cohesion. So Eric, I want to turn to you now. Several folks, including myself, have mentioned that this is all going to cost some money. You are coming from a donor, and the elephant in the room, which I think Beverly alluded to, is that the U.S. government appears to be pulling back in terms of funding on this. What are your thoughts coming from the Gates Foundation?
Thank you, Toshiro. Yeah, I think it's a valid point. The reality of it is that the funding gap is extremely large, and not one funding or one country can really replenish all the funding that is suddenly disappearing. From the Gates Foundation's point of view, the commitment remains. As you know, recently Bill Gates made the announcement for sunsetting the foundation within 20 years. Which creates a renewed emphasis on honing in on the things that work and finding solutions that can scale and produce results and value in the short and medium term. So yeah, the commitment towards funding these solutions and finding new solutions still there. There's also definitely more work going towards ensuring that the donors that remain stay where they are and continue their commitment. There's a lot of advocacy work with donor countries and also with other philanthropists to try to bring them into this type of work. it's definitely challenging times. Unfortunately, the foundation alone cannot take over. There's just not enough funding to do that. And the hope is that other large multilateral banks can take on these solutions and the programs that the foundation is developing and helping identify through exploration. Those solutions can actually be scaled and invested on by multilateral banks eventually. So that's the general idea. Now, if you allow me, I would like to turn back to the DPI conversation because it's obviously the area where I've been working on in the foundation. I think I agree that there's been everything that has been said, especially the point that it's really nothing new. It's just a different way of talking about the things that we have been working on for decades. Um, I think the renewed message, or what's new to me at least, is the way we talk about how government should be digitized. The central message being, let's talk about things that can be reused and that do not solve a specific problem. And that is so important right now in the current development space, given that funding is limited. We cannot afford to build solutions for a specific health program, for a specific problem, um, while ignoring everything else. So we need to start thinking about platform thinking and system thinking that was already mentioned. So platforms and solutions that can actually be reused for multiple use cases. Obviously, ID is very easy and a very easy use case because ID is used for everything in government. Payments is something along those lines. Obviously, data exchanges, same thing. You can use it in many services in government. So part of the work that we do in the foundation is exploring what other things can be reutilized in different areas. And public finance is one of the areas that we're looking into. Obviously, every department in government, education, health, agriculture, they all handle money. We need to find a way to make that execution of budgets and budget planning more effective, more efficient, so the dollars go longer. So that's part of the work that we are looking into right now. Lastly, I want to quickly get touched up on the data comment that was made. Obviously, AI is here to stay. There's definitely right now renew challenge or necessity across the board to find the right balance between supply of solutions, AIs, and the next best thing, and demand. Do we actually have created the demand, being, systems that actually will use the type of solutions, systems that actually produce the data that is reliable and is clean enough to be analyzed. There it relies a huge challenge in itself. So finding that balance, it's going to be very, very important because solutions are popping up left and right. I think it's fairly simple or fairly within reach to try to develop proof of concepts and solutions that utilize AI, but creating that environment that provides the right data is difficult. Last thing I want to say, and just touching on the question that was posted earlier on the chat about the change management and agile change management. This doesn't happen overnight, so all of this is incremental. So in a way, all of this has to, by definition, almost has to be agile. We need to understand the local context. A lot of these things, it's like the stick and the carrot, right? Some of those things have to start with regulations and become mandatory. Other things, you first show a shiny product and hope that there will be demand. So it really depends on the context. But yeah, it's the core message is don't try to solve everything at once. Let's start little by little and start growing incrementally. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Eric. So we'll now turn to the question and answer section of our event here. For folks in the room, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. I just ask that you identify yourself and whatever institution you want to be affiliated with as you ask your question. But maybe we'll start with some of the ones that have been dropped into the chat here, and particularly from Deki Toure Lesine. I think folks have kind of addressed one of the first ones you had, which was about recommendations for managing change in an agile manner within the framework of digitalization of a public structure that manages sensitive data. But you also had a great other one that was about transparency, and particularly that DPI brings transparency to administration and administrative systems. And we all know that in a system where corruption is I don't want to say rampant, but certainly present, that requires kind of a situational intelligence to implement well. And maybe I'll turn to you, Uzma, and try and actually combine those two a little bit, right? I think what we're getting at here is that sensitive data, of course, exists in all of these contexts. There are legitimate concerns to be raised about the use of sensitive data and how it's being handled. But there's also the change management and frankly, political economy reality that corruption and even just bureaucratic gatekeeping exists as well. So how do you kind of navigate between those two of understanding when someone is raising a legitimate concern about what they might see as misuse of sensitive data versus just wanting to protect their turf or protect their golden egg?
Golden egg, exactly. So I think I did mention about, seeing those things, that how the new system, which was aimed at increasing transparency of the tax records, was sabotaged. And I spotted some of the differences, how Rwanda did it. I'm sure multiple other countries have also done that. So definitely reform needed to be, a scaffold in political economy analysis. For me, it's a continuous political economy, which should be kind of a continuous basis should be done. Donors need to have this flexibility to pivot and shift depending on how the situation changes. Having said these two aspects, I think one important aspect that to me is a more longer term impact. And interestingly, we are talking in the context of some of this international development, which started after the Second World War, based or coming from, Washington Consensus back in the day. And as we see that there's sort of either exit or decline or weakening of the Washington Consensus, and if we are looking at AI or DPI as taking the lead, I mean, just from AI, what the estimation is that we will be having trillions of dollars in the GDP of the countries in the next 5 to 10 years, or even shorter timeline. So those are massive gains. How many investments are coming into the AI and DPI from the 3-4 major countries: US, Europe, China? And I think Tulsi, I think one of the speakers was mentioning about that as well, the AI factor. To me, the system which will be designed by 3 leading companies or regions will definitely have embedded biases and cultural norms and practices, which probably will not take into account what the factor has been mentioned, in African context or in Asian context, because all regional or even country contexts are different. So here, to me, to close this up is we need to enable developing countries where we are working, lower and middle income countries, those capacities which can enable them to be an active participant into this DPI system. Interoperability is one, but also the capacity building is not only by providing hardware, but by building these capacities where people can actually, clean up the data, which distorts, our own interpretations because the data is not there. So kind of providing help to the public officials in terms of becoming an active participant, which can happen through more open access systems rather than closed, codes, and thereby also providing safeguards for DPI and how the ecosystem works, and thereby kind of enabling their inputs to the rule-making process. So that after, there has been a lot of criticism on the Bretton Woods institutions and everything, 30 years down the lane, we might be criticizing that these systems were developed by some other countries for different contexts.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there, and I think you've hit on a number of points though, and I want to turn to the other panelists maybe and ask them the same question, but also add to it. One thing you mentioned was a trend towards looking at DPI as a way to essentially move towards enabling AI, right? When you mentioned cleaning up data, right? To me, that sounds like, okay, so there's AI enablement and there's models that are trained on Western European data already. How would you create a non-Western or a in lower middle income data set, right? That can also be used for training. Is that where you're going, or is it? Am I misreading it?
So I think briefly I'll respond. So this is more kind of for donors, to invest some of the resources in building those foundations,
Okay.
which include data. In terms of the biases in the system is more about the rulemaking process, the safeguards we are talking about, and Anga is going to talk about universal safeguards. Who is defining those universal safeguards? That's where I was referring to, that we need to have countries raising their voices at Anga on the universal safeguard for the ecosystem.
Great. Yeah. No, I guess the natural follow-up is, do you expect that to happen, or do any of our panelists expect to see that happen? And maybe Beverly, I know you're working a lot with civil society. Do you think that that's being articulated, perhaps not at UNGA, but just generally in some of these meetings?
Yeah, I think it's happening slowly but surely. I've seen a couple of really great examples here of how we can sort of move away from the hype and really focus on the practicality and the implementation. I want to come back to something Tulsi had said a little bit earlier, because I think that divide between North and South, like the way that like India and Estonia have contributed to shaping what we understand of DPI conversation, makes it less clean, so to speak, this time around. There's a lot more collaboration and engagement, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that the underlying principle, whether we're talking lower middle income countries or advances, are we still being user driven? Are we making sure that the data that we're using is of the quality and the specificity that's going to lead to the kind of outcomes, it's going to lead to the kind of, advisory outputs that's actually going to be accurate and usable for those populations? So I think it's maybe less about like who is doing it and how we're tailoring, but just like continuing to be user-centered, sort of really drawing from like that agile approach to software development and bring that into how we think about making DPI work for more people.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat, but before we get there, maybe we'll go to you first. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Joy Kamunyori. I am most recently Senior Health Information Systems Advisor from USAID, most recently, currently former USAID. Anyway, so my question is related to a couple of the speakers talked about sector-specific DPI, and I'm really curious to kind of push on that a little bit, because my knee-jerk reaction is when we're talking about things like digital ID or digital payments, why would we want to have, sector-specific platforms for that? Like Eric was talking about, reusable platforms and, building platforms that don't solve a specific problem and can be reused across sectors, etc. And I should think things like digital ID and digital payments are the kinds of things that you would want to reuse across multiple sectors, right? I was reading an article recently about how India is obsessed with digital IDs for everything, like a different digital ID for everything, and how that's becoming a problem. So I think I was just looking for some clarity on, what type of DPI are we talking about that would be sector specific, and why? Thanks.
Great. Yeah, that wonderful question. Beverly, do you want to respond on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one. I think a better way of reframing it is sector specific considerations. So it's not that we want to continue supporting these silos and sort of this not decentralization, that's not the right word. We don't want a continuation of silos. It doesn't serve most people. But how can we bring in sector-specific considerations earlier on? A lot of times with DPI, there's because of that, there's a lot of emphasis on the foundational piece, again, the ID and the payments piece, but how can we say, for example, can we connect an existing farmer system at the beginning of building out some of the foundational DPI so that we're not then going into retrofit, especially from a technical perspective, how we bring in some of those value additions that reach more people earlier on the process. So it's not to ditch DPI in favor of just doing for ag, just doing for health, but thinking about them as a centralized strategy. So that was a little bit of my last point about how we need more national consistency, is that you need a server for IDs. You need a server for farmer information. You need a physical infrastructure for all of these things, but many countries aren't yet planning for those digital investments across all of these areas. Like, how can we bring in what are the digital needs in agriculture? What are the digital needs in health? What are the digital needs in education? And make sure that we're not found that specific piece of ID and payment and looking at the bigger picture, the bigger investment, and how we can.
Thanks, Beverly. And yeah, certainly I'll throw in there, it can be cloud. You can have different cloud servers as well as physical. So just a quick note on that. But yes, a point well taken. And Eric, I saw you reaching forward. Did you want to speak? And especially maybe from your experience in El Salvador, having done some of this.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, first off, sending a virtual hug to my friend Joy there. I'm very glad that she was able to join. Yeah, so DPI, sectoral DPI. This is actually funny because I am also in the working group for DPI for health with the WHO, which is one of the examples of how this is being pushed into this at the sectoral level. Which initially, yes, it sounds like counterproductive because it's something that you are really containing within a sector. But then when you look deeper, you realize, especially in health, there's a lot of duplication across multiple health programs. So the same client patient might have a record and the TB, malaria, and HIV systems that are completely independent. So you need to redesign that. And so the idea is to create a reference architecture that can serve multiple programs within the health sector. The same could also perhaps be modeled for, let's say, agriculture, with there might be a seed fortification program, and you have the farmers registering for that, and that's different from the system that they have for their land registry. So designing that architecture in a way that can be reutilized and plugged into different systems. That's the work that I think is ahead of us. Again, having that platform thinking is not service specific, but yeah, it will set countries to develop new systems as they go and continue to mature in the digital journey. Over.
If I can just add to that, I think, yeah, exactly what Beverly and Eric have just shared. I think it's important to make sure we have tangible use cases that we're working towards. So, the concept of a sectoral specific DPI just allows us to frame and think about, okay, what does this context look like end to end for a farmer? What does this context look like end to end for a healthcare worker? And being able to do that sector by sector allows us to come up with different use cases that we could use DPI in. I mean, if you look at Visa, right, we are a payments network. You can use your Visa payment credential for anything. You could use it for education. You can use it for healthcare. You can use it to buy your groceries. But we have, even within our company, we have subject matter experts across many different sectors to make sure that the experience for whether it's the individual or the business owner or the government that's using the Visa services has as seamless of a possible experience as they're going through it. And I think, this connectivity that we've been talking about as well is important, not just across sectors, but even within government, right? What we've found working with, with governments around the world is often the ministry, digital ministry is not talking to the Ministry of Finance, is not talking to the Ministry of Agriculture. And so you're creating your DPI in a silo. And the first step is actually to get those ministries to start talking together. And then you can make sure that we don't have that outcome where you have a citizen that has a different digital ID for every single type of different government service that they want. A good example of that that's just in early stages right now actually is Ethiopia's FIDA digital ID system. So the whole concept there is for there to be a single route in for Ethiopians to open a bank account, paying for your school fees, renewing your licenses, sending money abroad. You're able to do all of that through one singular process. And so, I think that only comes from the interaction between the government ministries to start with, and then also bringing in, I think some of the other conversations have brought this up as well, the ecosystem of players. So who else do you need at the table to make sure that ultimately we're designing for the individual, for the business, for the end user?
Great, thank you. Scott.
Thank you. Scott Kleinberg, former USAID, former philanthropy leader. So I hear a tension in people's perspectives between, the need to develop country appropriate or regionally appropriate solutions that reflect local context and information, and not recreating the wheel. And then layered on top of that, I think, is our incentives operating at country level to have their own solutions. And in terms of development implementers, if they create bespoke solutions, they make more money, right? I think this is, a fundamental challenge that we face in moving forward from this point. And I'm just wondering how people are seeing it sorting out, and how can we create, governing structures in development, which are going to create the right incentives for not going through a whole nother microfinance revolution where every country had to create a bespoke solution that, what in the end was very effective, but at a fundamental level, maybe it used a whole lot more resources than it should have to get to where we got to.
I can jump in.
Sure, yeah.
I think the problem becomes the local conditions in each country are very specific.
Right.
And they are at a different stage of development. And then as we were just talking about, that even ministries are not talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So one is we don't have data. Second is we have weak data. Third is that we are not sharing even that weak data. I was in Cambodia doing some diagnostic just a few weeks ago, and ministries are just not sharing data with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think bespoke systems we are talking about, but then also bespoke systems for every ministry. That's how it is most of the time, on the ground. That's how it's working. One ministry doesn't not know what we are doing. I think one good thing which ADB has done, and I'm not super familiar with the digital practice, and I know there's a question as well here. They created a separate digital practice, which is taking up all of the digital work in countries. It's a new one, and I think World Bank has also started something on the digital division very recently. We will need a bit more time to say how it plays out. But my hope is that they can talk to each other because these will be the people who will be dealing the digital aspects, whether it's for a governance project or whether it's for a financial market project or it's a private sector project. So that might be one way from the donors to be able to push, for internal collaboration. And then we can have, even if it's a bespoke model, but then it's a bespoke model for the country or for multiple sectors rather than having to reinvent the wheel for every single ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you on that, and I'm a big advocate of embedding DPI or into the governance structure, into the institutions, which is probably one of the best ways for me for more sustainable effort.
Eric, I saw you had your hand up in here.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but just quickly, I think that the turnkey solutions are not really solutions, like because they're again, the context is different in every country, And I think the whole idea of digital development, digital transformation, and now DPI, it's about creating the scaffolding, the minimum viable products, those blueprints that you can reutilize in multiple places. Obviously, adding the context and the customizations that you will need. But yeah, I think turnkey solutions it's just a fallacy. Obviously, there's an incentive for private providers to sell you the everything. But yeah, so in my last comment before I leave, it's that the context itself, the solution, and it's only par, it's only not even halfway. As you know, we started using X-Road in 2016, right after it became open source. We never had nearly the amount of success that Estonian had because the conditions weren't set up, all the enablers, the institutions, the regulations. So it's again, it's an incremental journey. Every country is different, but you really have to keep an eye and understand where things are in your local context. Over.
Thank you. And we are at time, which is unfortunate because this conversation is just getting lively, and I think there's a lot more here. That being said, we do have to close out, and I want to start by thanking you all, and especially giving a big thank you to our panelists for their insights today. Please continue this conversation, connect with each other, and as the digital development work group, we'll certainly look for ways to kind of further this and dive in deeper. But thank you all again for coming today, and thank you to our panelists.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
It was great.
Thanks. Yeah. Great question as well. Yeah, I think you were right. Like there's a tension there, right? Of how much can you